You have your books of Yisrayl. This evening we'll be covering the 14th book of Yisrayl, Sin Never Again. Sin Never Again. I've learned a valuable lesson. You can apply this in your everyday life. You've got to watch for sin. Get it immediately. Stop it, nip it in the bud. If you ever desire to teach Yahweh's righteousness, I've learned this also from the seventh Malach, the seventh trumpeter. When you teach someone not to sin, you stop sinning yourself. So what we'll be covering here this evening is page 52 on chapter 5, the heads of Yaakov in the last days will destroy this evil system of sin. The saints of Yahweh will take control. And remember the series of sermons what Pastor has been bringing out concerning Yahweh is in full control over this great house. So again, we see the beauty of Yahweh's plan unfolding here. I want to start off here in verse 2 here. As always, Pastor greets the called out ones of the great house of Yahweh. He greets everyone. Shalom, brethren. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. But Pastor starts off concerning it is a beautiful day here at the great house of Yahweh. Always remember this. One day with Yahweh is better than 1,000 years without Him. There's no way that a man can make it in this world without Yahweh. Unless we have Yahweh's protection, we have no protection at all. But Pastor goes on and expounds here. It's a very beautiful day. It started with me early this morning. Remember the Proverbs 18 verse 17, I love those who love me. And those who seek me early, diligently, will find me. And that's where we should occupy our way of thinking. By seeking Yahweh early in the morning. But Pastor, it says, it started with the early this morning. And I praise and thank Yahweh that we have a righteous shepherd. He's Yahweh's righteous representative. Don't ever take your eyes off that seventh Malach. Don't ever turn your ears from the voice of the seventh trumpeter. And if we do, any one of us, then we will die in our sins. I'm not making these things up. We're not playing games in the house of Yahweh. We need to be alert and vigilant in the great house of Yahweh. But indeed, it is a beautiful day in the great house of Yahweh. You remember the great patriarch Yaakov? He said, how wonderful, how beautiful, how awesome and splendid is this place. This is none other than the great house of Yahweh, which is the entranceway, the gateway into the kingdom of Yahweh. Always keep in mind the great house of Yahweh is the tree of life. And this is where from this tree of life, where the overflowing of Yahweh's righteousness and peace comes forth from. And this is the only prophesied location that you will learn and understand the beautiful, brilliant, and magnificent mind of Yahweh. I've learned this from Pastor. We were covering this. He spoke these words in 1986. But Pastor mentioned concerning the Holy Scriptures on page 64 on the reverence of Yahweh, verse 166. I just want to read this. But Pastor goes on to expound here, and I really appreciate many of us were not here in the house of Yahweh. And many of us, when we were called into the great house of Yahweh, we brought Christianity. We brought all the worship of the gods and the goddesses into the house of Yahweh. But Pastor was said that we must strive diligently to unify ourselves with the great house of Yahweh. But notice what this mighty Malach, I do consider Pastor a mighty, righteous, faithful, trusted Malach of Yahweh, the great trumpeter. But Pastor goes on to say, I know these things from the Scriptures. He knows the law and the prophecies of Yahweh. I know the Scriptures. You cannot fool me from the Scriptures. That's one thing I love about my great overseer, our beloved overseer. I know the Scriptures. You cannot fool me on the Scriptures. They cannot fool the people of the world, the religions, leaders of the world. You cannot fool the house of Yahweh. You cannot fool the seventh Malach of Yahweh with the Scriptures. But Pastor said, there is a difference in knowing the Scriptures and taking a concordance and looking up one word. If you know the Scriptures, you know the mind of Yahweh. How many of you desire to know the mind of Yahweh? You desire to know the mind of Yahweh? Yahweh uses His beautiful, brilliant, magnificent mind constructively to bring forth His righteous plan this plan of righteousness and peace to his entire creation. Mankind, on the other hand, they use their mind destructively with anger, hatred, vengeance, and retaliation. That's why we need to occupy our way of thinking. We should govern and optimize our way of thinking when we think like Yahweh. But Pastor goes on to say, if you know the scriptures, you know the mind of Yahweh. We must diligently, and I do mean diligently, teach our sons and daughters to respect and to love the book of Yahweh. Teaching a child is not just in a classroom setting. Teaching a child under your wings is to let that child, your son, your daughters, how much you appreciate their effort. Encourage them, build them up, let them know that you love them as a parent. One of the greatest words ever spoken to me when Yahweh called me out from the world of sin, when I left the island of Hawaii. My father, I do consider him a mountain of a man because he was a great provider. But when I left the island of Hawaii to come to the great house of Yahweh, the words that he spoke to me, he said, he looked at me, and we held each other, and he said, I love you, my son. And I said, Dad, I love you too, Dad. We embraced, and I went my way. And that's what Yahweh said. We have to learn the mind of Yahweh. You must come to the great house of Yahweh. But those were the greatest words ever spoken to me by my father. And I've learned that when Pastor addresses the called out ones, and he said, I love you, my brethren, I love you, you're my sons and daughters. We should let our children know how much we love them. Speak words of life and blessings and encouragement. Uplift them. Every opportunity, every moment we have, we should treasure every opportunity we have with our beautiful children and grandchildren. Every opportunity I have. When my children and when my grandchildren come into my presence, I do pronounce Yahweh's priestly blessing upon them. Numbers chapter 6, verse 24 to 26. Always. I said, Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and be merciful to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And every single day when I leave the presence of my wife, when I go to work every day, I pronounce Yahweh's priestly blessings over her. Verbally, I utter those words. This is how you will bless your sons and daughters. I want Yahweh's name, his character upon my children, my grandchildren, my family, my brothers and sisters, all the days of their life. If you know the scriptures, you know the mind of Yahweh. I want that to be sink in the depths of your heart. From the fruits of my lips and from the depths of my heart, I will praise you. I will bless you. I will exalt you, O Yahweh, my Father, today, tomorrow, and forever. That's the attitude we need to train and teach and educate our children diligently. The law says, and these laws which I command you this day must be in your heart, and you must teach them diligently to your children, and talk about them when you sit in your house, and when you walk on the road, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. Satan uses people. Satan influenced people to bring down mankind's strength. She has weakened the nations. That's why Pastor said, I know these things from the scriptures. You cannot fool me on the scriptures. I know the scriptures from front to back. You agree with that, family of Yahweh? This was 29 years ago. Pastor had to deal with a lot of stupidity at the great house of Yahweh back then. I had to learn a lot. When I started reading my our beloved overseer's writing, we rejoice. Remember, brethren, in all your studies. Remember this in all your studies. Yahweh's credibility, his reputation and character is absolutely perfect. Yahweh is the most perfect being in the entire universe. Yahweh has eternal life already abiding within him. The great house of Yahweh is the pillar and ground of the truth. Yisrayl Hawkins, the seventh Malach of Yahweh, the seventh trumpeter of Yahweh. He's a pillar of life, a pillar of light, a pillar of strength to each and every one of us here and to the whole world. We need to understand the beauty of it. That's why I say don't ever take your eyes off that seventh Malach. Don't ever turn your ears from hearing the voice of the seventh trumpeter. And if you do, then we will die in our sins. And Yahweh forbid that we will die. We will live and rejoice and shout for joy because we love Yahweh's laws. But Pastor goes on to say, if you know the scriptures, you know the mind of Yahweh that He gives you in the books. Search out the book of Yahweh and read and study and meditate on it day after day after day. For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at the mouth of the priests. For the priests of the great house of Yahweh, from the seventh Malach and the priests, are the treasure house of Yahweh's words, the law and the prophets. It was never to be reserved for the priests. It was to be distributed out unto the people so that they can understand the mind of Yahweh. If you know the scriptures, you know the mind of Yahweh. That's what Yeshua told the religious leaders. He said, you are deceived because you do not know the scriptures, know the power of Yahweh. The power of Yahweh was right in front of these people back then. But Pastor goes on to say, there is a difference in knowing the scriptures and taking a concordance and looking up one word. If you know the scriptures, you know the mind of Yahweh that He gives you in the books. What we need to do is study them over and over and over until they become parts of our minds. You remember Hebrews 10:16? This is the covenant that I will renew with them after those days. Says Yahweh, I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds will I write them. Then these little things will not bug us, and Satan cannot turn us away from Yahweh with these things or against His house or against anyone in the house of Yahweh. We need to guard the house of Yahweh at all times. Guard your children. Teach your children. When I say teach, don't just send it to anyone to teach them. Make sure that you must monitor. Pastor said in one of his newsletters, he said, the very first lesson from the beginning, you must monitor righteousness. If you do righteousness, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do righteousness, sin is crouching at your door. The desire to sin is with mankind. But we must overcome it. Genesis 6 verse 5 for your notes. And Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every intent of the thoughts of man's heart was evil continually. So again we see here in verse 3, Pastor goes on concerning the bread sack, but he said on this bread sack, they used to speak long ago. 2 Samuel 20 and verse 18. They used to speak long ago to receive an answer, to receive the peaceful solution. You, brethren, you are the light of the world. The house of Yahweh is the pillar of light, the pillar of life, the pillar of strength to this world. You are the peaceful solution to anyone and everyone who comes in your presence. But Pastor exalts us here. Today we ask of Abel at Abel. Ask at Abel and of Abel, and that would settle the matter. Let's continue here in verse 6. Pastor here goes on to say, the end is when Yahweh's house. He's speaking about the end. This end is the end of rebellion. This rebellion lifestyle of sin that the sons of Yaakov, the sons of Yisrayl Hawkins, will destroy. 1 Yachanan 3, 7 and 8. Little children, let no man deceive you. Don't deceive yourself by shutting yourself off from the inspiration of Yahweh. How do you do that? You quench Spirit Holy from you. When you entertain and when you entertain sin in your life. But Pastor said the end is the end of rebellion, the end of the Nimrod system, the end of man's government of and by the people, the rebellious people. It's very difficult to work with someone who is unteachable, who's stubborn and rebellious. Very difficult. So again, Pastor goes on to bring forth this sermon here. At the end is when Yahweh's house, the great house of Yahweh, the pillar and ground of Yahweh's truth, Yahweh's kingdom, remember this, Yahweh's kingdom is a kingdom of unity. The kingdom of Yahweh is a kingdom of unity. And we must diligently, we must be willing and obedient to unify ourselves with this kingdom of Yahweh. The kingdom of Yahweh is a kingdom of unity. And Pastor goes on to say that his house he's building now, his kingdom will be given control. Absolute control. Yahweh is the only being in the entire universe. He has absolute, unlimited control power. Yahweh has unlimited control power. People have power. Governments have some form of power. Religious leaders have a form of power, but Yahweh has unlimited control power. He knows his plan from the very beginning. But Pastor goes on to explain here. That's his house he is building now. His kingdom will be given control. That's the end. They will be given control as is shown in Genesis 49, where he shows the heads of Yaakov, the heads of Yisrayl, the sons of Yisrayl Hawkins. The heads of Yisrael in these last days are teaching the great words of Yahweh. We're teaching the greatest words of Yahweh to this dying world. The words of Yahweh is the most beautiful sound. The very mention of Yahweh's name is the most beautiful sound in any language. But the heads of Yisrael in these last days are teaching the great wisdom, the great words of Yahweh, the great laws of Yahweh to all the inhabitants of the earth. We're going to have in this rebellious world, we're going to have the ability to uphold. Pastor is expounding here. We're going to have the ability to uphold and keep Yahweh's laws. Let's go over to Genesis, and then he explains the prophecies of the 12 sons of Yaakov. They're in Genesis, and this what will occur here in the last days in Genesis, the early part of Genesis. That's in Genesis, first 4 chapters, showing the rebellion that took place, and they didn't want to follow Yahweh's laws strictly. In verse 8, but in Genesis 49, verse 10, it shows the scepter, which is the power to give laws, the power. Deuteronomy 30, verse 14, the law is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so you may obey it. 2 Samuel 22, verse 31, Yahweh, his way is perfect. The law of Yahweh are without flaw. He is a shield to those who take refuge and trust in him. Psalms 19, verse 7, the laws of Yahweh are perfect, converting the whole person. So Pastor is talking about this scepter, which is the power to give laws, the ability to give laws, the knowledge and wisdom to give laws. You also see in that scepter the knowledge and wisdom to uphold, to guard and keep the laws given by Yahweh. You remember, we do have a sign here in the house of Yahweh. We, the house of Yahweh, will guard and keep Yahweh's righteousness. We should train our children, teach them. We, the house of Yahweh, will guard and keep Yahweh's righteousness. Proverbs 2, verse 6 for your notes, for it is Yahweh who gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. So, Pastor is explaining here, you also see in that scepter the knowledge and wisdom to uphold, to guard, and keep the laws given by Yahweh. There's no better way at all but to bring peace and joy and love. And then Pastor goes on to say here in verse 9, it's the last days. We are living in the last prophesied generation. And then in verse 10, 11, and 12, Pastor goes on to say it shows the scepter that Yeshua qualified for. Yeshua qualified for the scepter of righteousness. You remember Hebrews chapter 1, verse 8 and 9, and to the Son Yahweh says, the throne of your Father is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is a scepter of your kingdom. For you have loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore Yahweh has anointed you with the oil of gladness above your companions, your fellow heirs. So we see here that Yeshua, as many as will live righteously as Yeshua Messiah, you will be ridiculed, you will be scoffed and mocked at. But Yeshua taught us a valuable lesson. Learn to turn the other cheek. Never retaliate. Never escalate a problem. Find a solution to every problem. Remember what we learned in the Peace of Solution Character Education program? Concerning war. War is working against righteousness, but war, the acronym for war is a sign of failure. Failure to practice self-control, failure to communicate respectfully, failure to resolve conflicts peacefully, and failure to value human life. That's what war is. But here at the great house of Yahweh, Yisrayl Hawkins is the ambassador of peace. I would highly recommend and I would endorse Yisrayl Hawkins to be the ambassador of peace to the entire world. Yes, he represents the kingdom of Yahweh, the kingdom of peace. The kingdom of Yahweh is a kingdom of unity, a kingdom of peace. So again, we see here the scepter that Yeshua qualified for. And that's what we're all doing. We're qualifying for a position. Not to try to stop the work of Yahweh or quench anyone. If someone is excelling in the way of righteousness, then urge him on. Continue to urge your brothers. If someone is slacking, urge that brother on towards righteous love and righteous works. So again, we see here the beauty unfolding here at the great house of Yahweh, that Yeshua qualified for, who's now high priest over the house of Yahweh. Hebrews 7 verse 26, for such a high priest is fitting for us, who is holy, harmless. Yeshua, his characteristic traits, he was holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners and made higher than the heavens. And we should have that same attitude. We should teach and train and educate our children to follow the footsteps of Yeshua. He was the reflection of perfection and the representation of Yahweh himself. So again, he's a high priest over the house of Yahweh. Well, of course, what we're doing now in the house of Yahweh is proving ourselves. We're proving ourselves. Sabbath after Sabbath, we're keeping our eternal appointments with Yahweh. This is what marks each and every one of us as belonging to Yahweh. I noticed that one of the righteous women of Yahweh said, I belong to Yahweh. I am the house of Yahweh. You are the house of Yahweh. Yisrayl Hawkins is the house of Yahweh, and the house of Yahweh is Yisrayl Hawkins. So this is what we're teaching mankind, to beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. When nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn war anymore. That's what the sons of Yisrayl Hawkins will be doing. We're teaching and explaining in detail the beauty of Yahweh's plan of righteousness and peace. There's no righteousness in stealing from your neighbor. If you steal something, anything from your neighbor, it will cause major conflicts. You steal, you move someone's boundary, his property pin. You take his water from his land, anything, his lawnmower, his shovel. It's going to cause conflicts. Stealing has nothing to do with righteousness. It is the violation, the breaking of Yahweh's laws. And we need to teach our children diligently, all the days of their life, to be righteous, to choose to be righteous, to be respectful, to be responsible, and to hold themselves up accountable for everything they think, say, and do. Never retaliate. Parents, don't ever teach your children to retaliate. Two wrongs don't make a right, as Pastor brought out in the peaceful solution. So again, we see here, we're proving ourselves to Yahweh. When we keep Yahweh's Sabbaths, when we do what is required of us according to Yahweh's laws, then we've settled the matter. The matter is settled between you and Yahweh. You've settled the matter between you and Yahweh when we keep and practice Yahweh's laws of righteousness. Proving that we will uphold this law that he gave, the law that Yeshua has been given judgment over the people who are practicing keeping this law. And we will join him, as Yahweh shows, in the end time. So as 1 Timothy 1 verse 8 reads, we know indeed that the laws of Yahweh is perfect if one agrees with the law, taking it to himself to use. You only have I known of all the families of the earth. Can two walk together unless we are in agreement. We must be in agreement and unify ourselves to this unified body of priests here at the great house of Yahweh. But Pastor goes on to say, we're fighting now. We're bringing forth that Yahweh shows in prophecy. The house of Yahweh is fulfilling Bible prophecy. I was reading Pastor's recent article concerning the rebuilding of the temple there in Jerusalem. The prophecy shows this is the time for the rebuilding of the temple. And we have Yisrayl Hawkins and one of the great priests of Yahweh assisting him, one of the chief engineers of that project. But we have the plans. We have the plans to restore and rebuild that temple there in Jerusalem. Even Pastor brought an open letter to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of bloodshed, insecurity taking place in the Middle East. But listen to the voice. Listen, O heavens, and I will speak. Hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Let my teachings fall like rain, and let my words descend like dew. The words of Yahweh is very powerful, is very refreshing, is very comforting. Yeshua said, I will send you another comforter. I will send you a great comforter who will teach each and every one of us the reverence of Yahweh. How to properly reverence Yahweh. How to properly keep the law of the Sabbath all the days of our lives. But Pastor says, Yahweh shows in prophecy from the beginning. He shows in prophecy from the beginning this great work, the great work of Yahweh. This is the work of Yahweh, that you believe into the one whom Yahweh has sent. We not only believe him, we not only believe the seventh trumpeter, the seventh messenger, but we love him. We agree with his teachings. We respect the words of the seventh Malach. Revelations 10 verse 7. But in the days of the voice of the seventh Malach, when he will begin to sound, the great secrets of Yahweh would be finished, as he declared to his servants, the prophets. So I urge each and every one of you, my dear brethren, don't ever take your eyes off that seventh Malach. Don't ever turn your ears from listening to the voice of the seventh trumpeter. If any one of us do, I really do mean this. I'm not playing games. It is Yahweh's doing. You're going to die in your sins. You understand that, men? Do you really understand that? The significance? The house of Yahweh is a house of refuge, a house of protection. We need Yahweh's protection. We need Yahweh's inspiration all the days of our lives. So again, we must never alter Yahweh's laws. We must continue to keep and uphold Yahweh's laws of righteousness. Would everyone please stand? I do have the privilege and honor, and high honor, to present to you my righteous brother and fellow priest and co-worker, the great Kohan Kifa, Yosef Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated, and may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. You know, always remember the words that the great priest had just spoken. You know, we have so much to look forward to in the house of Yahweh, and this is truly, it's the only place that in the world that has true hope. You know, it's a very special place that we're in right now, and it's a very special time that we're blessed to be able to live in right now and to witness the things that are coming about. And to do so with the foreknowledge that Yahweh has given us, the great wisdom that he's given us through his house it's truly remarkable. You know, every day it's like you stand in awe of the great wisdom that Yahweh has given us. And praise Yahweh. Through this sermon, we're going to see a bit more of that wisdom and understanding that Yahweh gives us. I'm going to be started on page 57. And throughout this page, he's talking about a gathering. All right, and there's actually a couple gatherings going on in the world right now. Two of them, if you remember all what pastors taught us about this great race that we're in right now. In verse 43, he shows that they were brought together. That's what we're doing right now. We're gathering a people. And we're not per se picking them up and bringing them here right now, but we're gathering them in their minds. Okay, Pastor's going to show us how this is done in this sermon. And, you might be surprised to see the instruments that Yahweh is using. Oftentimes when I grew up, reading bits and about the scriptures, I never really put myself in there as any of the people being described. But we are actually those people who are being described, those instruments that Yahweh has called to use for this great calling. And it's a great privilege, it's an honor, but it's a great responsibility that we have too. Because, we have to take this job with the utmost of seriousness and diligence in preparing for it. What Pastor's saying right here, he says, we're gathering them in their minds. Okay, if you have your book of Yahweh, there's two scriptures that show us. Pastor's always been training us for this particular job right here. But there's two scriptures that are kind of a palindrome in themselves. There's Proverbs 15:2, which says that the tongue of the wise uses knowledge correctly. Okay, the tongue of the wise uses knowledge correctly. And if you flip those numbers around to 2 Timothy 2:15, which you're probably also familiar with, but it says to study to show yourselves approved to Yahweh, a workman who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And that's what we come to the house of Yahweh to learn. We came here to learn the truth. And of course, we didn't come here to teach the house of Yahweh the truth. We came here to learn the truth. As Ecclesiastes says, be ready to listen. Be ready to listen. Come here with a humble attitude and forget the fact that you know it all just for a little while. And, you'll be so surprised at the great wisdom that Yahweh is trying to get across to us. And the more we can quiet ourselves and humble ourselves, the more of that wisdom we're able to receive. And it's a remarkable thing, because Yahweh can make wise the very simplest of people. And that's who he called. So, it's a remarkable thing to watch and behold. But on page 58, if we turn the page, he says, here at the proper time. Now remember that this has been, it's not like the work of Yahweh has just been, always available for mankind to grasp hold of. This is a proper time that this takes place. Now, at this proper time, we're putting this information into the people's mind, and they will come, as Yahweh has said. You would be a fool not to believe that. They will come, just like Yahweh said. Now, the question is, are you ready? Am I ready? Are we ready to do the work that Yahweh called us here to do? And each day, we have an opportunity to prepare ourselves, to train ourselves to be a part of that work. And remember what Daniel said, the great prophet Daniel, those who teach and instruct many, they're not going to be just obscure and not noticed. They're going to shine, but before we shine, remember, what is it that we're shining? It's the face of Yahweh, right? And we don't get that through our own interpretations. We come here to this house to learn how to reflect this perfection that Yahweh is showing us, that He's showing us through His witness. And we got to we've really got to take this seriously and don't let a moment go by to where this is not on your mind. Don't get caught up in things and forget about this, because it's the most important thing. We were called here for a work. In verse 44, he says, but you see both here in Matthew 24:31, he says, he will send his malachim. He will send his malachim to do this job, to gather. Now you see that in verse 31. They're talking about gathering together to him, and he will send his malachim to do this great job. They're going to come from where? Pluto? No. Let's read on. He says, he will send his Malachim to do this great job that is being led by a great sound of a trumpet. That, of course, is the trumpeter. All right? But notice that the trumpeter is leading. He is leading these Malachim, a trumpeter, which I brought much on this trumpeter in these last days, who will sound, being led by them, but these are the messengers of Yahweh. You know, if you turn to Psalms 19, you know, the way the witness teaches is just so outstanding. He speaks in such depth that you know that there's no shallowness to anything he says. It's like a continuous, ongoing instruction that never runs dry. But in Psalms 19, in verse 1, he says, "Heaven's messengers proclaim the glory of Yahweh, and the expanse of his sky declares the works of his hands. Day after day, speech is uttered, and night after night, knowledge is shown." You know, this is not in the world. You know, speech is uttered in the world, but it is of no value. It only leads to destruction. But if you notice in verse 5, he says, "He comes forth like a bridegroom from his canopy, and he rejoices like a champion to run a race." You know, this is a very clear direction that we're working in these last days. You know, and the witness has shown us the great secrets that have been sealed from all mankind, from the beginning of time until now. You know, and that is a remarkable thing, which we'll get to that. We'll get to that in this sermon. Verse 46, he says, "Now let's hold your place here in Daniel and Matithia, and you've got to hand..." He's showing us how to hold our place with our fingers. He says, "You got fingers, and that's for the reason we got them." He says, "Now go to Revelations 10 and verse 7. He says, "Now in the days of the voice of the seventh Malach, when he will begin to sound," that is the sound of the trumpet, "when he will begin to sound, the great secret of Yahweh would be finished. And that is, he will be revealed, but it will come to pass that it has both of those meanings, as he has declared to his servants the prophets." So all these prophecies are going to come to pass, and have come to pass, with the exception of the last few that will come to pass. Just as he declared, he will not step out of line. He's talking about this great trumpeter here, and we'd be fools, again, to not believe what the prophet spoke of this last trumpeter. He said he will not step out of line. Yahweh goes and he shows you many times the character of this trumpeter is going to stay in touch with him, Yahweh, constantly. Constantly. Okay, so we have that reassurance. You know, it takes a fair bit of studying to really get that in your mind, and a constant reminding of yourselves, because things can tend to look misleading in this world, and people cast doubt, and they're able to cast doubt if your mind is not firmly sitting on the laws and the prophets and the teachings from the house of Yahweh. You know, and if you allow that to lack in your studies, you know, you're capable of being deceived. So be aware of that. Yahweh shows that the character of this trumpeter is going to stay in touch with him constantly, following the straight line and leading the messengers to do his work. And that's what he's doing. So, and of course, that is to gather this great people together. You know, and remember, this is going to be talked about where people won't even really recall what the great work of the great, Moshe and the children of Israel. He said that this will be such a greater work in these last days that it won't really even come into remembrance so much. You know, it's hard to comprehend that, but this work will be spoken about forever. And here we are with the unique privilege of being right where we need to be, right at the right time. You know. You know, if you look at some of these large corporations, you know, and you think, If I could have been, with Coca-Cola at the beginning and invested my money in Coca-Cola, I would be a billionaire by now. Well, this is something much greater than even Coca-Cola. This is the kingdom of heaven, and all the great things that are promised. Yahweh wants to give this all to us, but we have to come into unity with Him. And this is what we come to His house to learn how to do. In verse 48, he says, "Now, if you look down to Revelations 10:11, he said to me, you," the same one here, the seventh Malach, he said to me, "You must prophesy again before many peoples, nations, languages, and kings." And of course, that's what we're doing in the house of Yahweh. Kings, that is people in leadership positions, and they are themselves wanting this information from the house of Yahweh. Pastor goes through this, pretty often to show us and to remind us of the work that's going forth from His house. In verse 52, he says, "The Peaceful Solution Character Education Incorporated announced the Skype classes." Now, that is going to go also. He says, this is going to reach out. The Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, it's already reaching out globally in spite of all that the enemy can do. And if you go back in history a few years and you look at the great persecution that was put up against this house and all the evil things that were spoken of against this house, and you look at the resilience of Yahweh's work, you'd have to be foolish to not see Yahweh's hand involved in that. Because no other, you look at some of these other groups that have been, suffered persecution. It's always been once and to their fall, and they rise no more. Well, the house of Yahweh is offered this protection, which, hopefully we'll get to Psalms 91 here a little bit later. But, remember that. Remember the great confidence that you should have in being a member of the house of Yahweh and knowing that Yahweh is on your side and is approving. If you're in unity with the house of Yahweh, Yahweh is approving your work. And if Yahweh is going to stand with us, we're going to be scared at what men can do. It's nothing. That their work is nothing. They can't even govern themselves. They're like spoiled children with no parenting. And we've been given the opportunity to instruct these people. First we have to be instructed ourselves, and then what we learn what we've been taught here. Then we go out teaching the very things that we've learned. So that peace that Yahweh has created within us, we then share with others. It's an awesome plan that Yahweh has for mankind. Here we are, this remnant, this group that Yahweh has called to do this work, these messengers. Now in verse 56, let me just finish there in verse 52, because at the bottom he says, this is pretty great that Yahweh alone can open these doors. Yahweh alone can open these doors. That was, if you remember back, going a little bit back in time into 1998, when the witness went over to Israel, and you look at some of the pictures here in the sanctuary and all the different dignitaries and chief rabbis and Shimon Peres and all these leaders that he met with over there. If you tried to do that, well, I know me, I couldn't afford the plane ticket. I'd never get there. But, if you think about what it takes to have audience with all these people, only Yahweh can do this. Only Yahweh could have opened these doors for His work, and it was for the purpose. If you look at the Temple Mount there, and like the great priest before me was speaking of this latest article and the latest prophetic word, the great work that Yahweh has done, and how this was published way a long time ago for this time period that we're in right now. The foresight that Yahweh had in order to do this, and this has already been presented. But of course, like we just read, you must prophesy again. This is going to continue. We're going to be continuing to work through the very end of this. We're not going to run away at any point. We are here for a job, and that we're going to be gathering and continually gathering out of these nations. And that's in verse 56. He says, Revelations 10:7, but in the days of the voice of the seventh Malach, when he will begin to sound, that is, preach, and the gathering is taking place, getting them ready to come to Yahweh's house. We have to prepare them to come to Yahweh's house. The nations and the languages are going out to all nations and languages. And in Revelations 11 then, it shows that the temple is measured, just like we did. The temple is measured and the court is left out. Now, in verse 58, he says, now these are, as it were, the two olive trees. That's what they are. And if you want to look up olive trees in Strong's, you can get help. You can gather some of it. But it won't help you at all. He said it won't help you get it all. It won't help you get it all. The book of Yisrayl will help you get it all. And of course, now we have that to where we can just type in the keywords that we're looking for, and it instantly pops up all the different spots. That ought to give us a very big head start in our learning if we utilize those tools. Of course, if it just sits on the computer and you don't ever use it, well, you're not taking advantage of the most remarkable invention in my lifetime as far as technology goes. I can't think of anything that can outdo the Yisrael Says program in the world of technology. I just can't. There's nothing that was created that was more beneficial for mankind. Well, turning the page to page 60, he says, now, by the way, you can get an emblem, and he's showing the little pin of the Ark of the Covenant that we had. He said, now, in the middle of the paragraph, this covenant was actually locked up in a box, and it was sealed, and only the house of Yahweh is prophesied to be able to open that seal and reveal this to the world. So, as hard as they all try, they can't do it. Okay, so in verse 61, he says, no single prophet ever on earth has been able to do that. Not even Yeshua now. Now, he said, even Yeshua, but now Yeshua as high priest over the last day's work has unsealed it. But he's talking about in his time period there. Yeshua as high priest over the last day's work has unsealed this Ark of the Covenant. And from that, what was put in there, the book of the law and the prophecies, is being revealed to his house. To us. To lowly us, right? Well, the book of the law and the prophecy is being revealed to his house. Now, he says, this is my house. Like the great Kohan had spoke before me. Now, that's what Yeshua said, and that's what each and every one of us says. This is my house, right? Let's look over to Psalms 91 real quick. Because we ought to be saying that, yes. We ought to be saying that this is our house. If you look in Psalm 91 and in verse 9, he said, because now remember all the protection that is offered in this great prophecy, and how Yahweh shows that these things will not come near you, right? Well, look in verse 9, he says, because, so that there's a reason why, because you have made Yahweh your refuge, and because you have made the Most High your house. Now, remember that it's more than just saying that. It's conditional, right? That there's conditions to being a part of the house of Yahweh, and there's other Psalms that talk about that. I think it's Psalms 15 is a great one. Definitely not the only place where it's mentioned. But in Psalms 15, he says, Yahweh, who shall abide in your house? And he gives a list of various things that identify the character of the individuals who Yahweh allows to abide in his house. Because Yahweh will not allow wickedness to dwell in his house forever. He is merciful and he gives us time. But it's not like these things are going to be allowed to defile his house. Yahweh is in very close watch over this work. if you think about this, if you've ever built anything, and you've planned it out and you've worked meticulously on it and you've tried to get all the details right, would you just abandon it at the end of the project to let it, okay, I've taken it this far. That's as far as I care to take it. I don't care how it goes from here. No, you tend to want to see it through. You want to see every little detail through. And that's when you look at the work of Yahweh and the attention that Yahweh has on us. This is his finishing work that we see right here taking place in these last days. So, in order to dwell in the house of Yahweh, for this to truly be our house, we need to go over and read these things. To his brother, he does not take up a reproach. Is that us? Well, it needs to be us. Does he do, nor does he do evil to his friend, nor with his tongue does he backbite and slander. That needs to be us if we're going to abide in this house. If we want all that protection that we just read about in Psalms 91. We need to make that character our character. And Yahweh's got, he's really gone all out to make sure that we've had every single opportunity and every tool at our disposal to make that possible. So what does it really take? It takes our effort. It takes a drive. It takes motivation. And we're motivated by the hope that Yahweh gives us. We can look at the evil in this world, and we ought to be motivated with compassion to see that we don't want this suffering. Knowing and understanding where it all comes from, we ought to be motivated to want to do something about it. We ought to have that. But he says in verse 62, he said, HEB tried to copy this from us. And he said, with my HEB, he says, well, they got that from the house of Yahweh. That I am the house of Yahweh. In verse 63, he says, he talks about other groups, other Christian groups that go around. They try to copy things that the house of Yahweh teaches, just like Jeremiah 23 said that they would. They try to copy this or that, and then they'll have their own character education program. But it's of no benefit to the people. That's what the great prophet Jeremiah was inspired to write. It was absolutely no benefit to the people. And as a matter of fact, it actually caused the people to forget Yahweh. So I plead with everybody. I plead with everybody to please do not seek wisdom from these worldly preachers. Don't seek anything from them. Don't listen to them. We don't have anything, there's nothing that you need to know that they're saying until they're coming to repent. Okay? You might be really surprised to find, hey, this one knows what day the seventh day of the week is. Wow. Great. That's really great. If they're still teaching any deception, they're part of the things that are fighting against the kingdom of Yahweh. And you don't want to have your part with them. Yahweh says, come out. Come out from all of it. Drench yourself in this work, and you will not be sorry for it. Invest yourself into this kingdom, and you will reap. You will reap more than you're able to. It's everything that Yahweh promises us is true, and you can rest assured that it's true. The things that in this world are vanishing quickly. They're grasping at straws. They're groping in the dark. They don't know where they're going. And all these things that they try to copy from the house of Yahweh, they'll understand. They will understand. The prophecies show that they'll understand in the end that Yahweh has loved us, that Yahweh has loved our overseer, that Yahweh has loved this house, and that Yahweh has been working with this house, and only this house. That will be made clear to them. Think of all the things that are going to take place here very shortly, all the suffering in this world that they're going to experience, and how even after much of it takes place, I know that the majority of them will not repent. But in the end, they will realize, because as sure as any other prophecy that's ever came to pass, that prophecy stands true and will stand true, that they will realize that Yahweh has loved this, our overseer, that Yahweh has loved this work. And they'll come here. They will. Now, in verse 65, he says, the prophecy of the heads of Jacob, and he's talking about in this sermon the prophecy of the heads of Jacob, and the gates of hell will not prevail against this work that is proceeding right now throughout all the world. And at the end of 65, he talks about that there are righteously gossiping about the wonderful things of Yahweh. And this is going forth. There are many, many people righteously gossiping about the wonderful things of the work of Yahweh, which, if you think about it, we ought to be the leaders in this. We can practice certainly amongst ourselves. Instead of griping sometimes, we can righteously gossip about the wonderful things that Yahweh has done, the wonderful things that He's shown us, the wonderful instruction and wisdom that He's given to His house. In verse 67, he says, well, anyway, you're going out to this world, and there's no place on earth that is hidden from anyone anymore, because of the internet and all these inventions in these last days, that knowledge has been increased, like prophecy said it would. Well, this is going out all over the world. Now, he says, now the Ark of the Covenant that was sealed in the days of Adam is now opened in these last days, as the prophecy said. And just a few prophecies that show, if you turn to Isaiah 29, because Yahweh really does show us these things here a little, there a little, and as Pastor brings things out, we see him more and more, because we don't see anything until he breaks that seal and gives us the information. He gives us the picture, and then all of a sudden it's everywhere. It's like, where was that? How did I not see that? Well, it wasn't our, we have to understand these things that are being revealed to us have been completely hidden from mankind, and until they're brought to us, we don't see them. But in Isaiah 29:11, he said, "Now the whole vision has become to you like the words of a book that is sealed, which they deliver to a man who is learned." And he's saying, "Read this, I ask you." But he says, "I cannot, for it is sealed." Well, this vision, what he says here, the whole vision was sealed. And if you turn to Habakkuk, we get another picture of that, because the great prophet Habakkuk, on page 710 of your book of Yahweh, in chapter 2 and verse 3, he says, "The vision is yet for an appointed time." Okay, so, but notice, he says, at the end it will speak, and it will not lie either. It will not lie. So, this is these are great things that we're seeing unfolding, and the more things than we could possibly cover in one evening. But it's like in Revelations 10:7, which shows that in the days of the seventh Malach, in the last trumpeter, that these secrets would be revealed. The great wisdom of Yahweh is going to be made known. And we're right here learning it. We have to just make sure that we continue to do so. Surely you can look and see we're right there at the end right now. So